Hello, guys and gals. You want to fuck my ass a little bit? Well, ladies and gentlemen, get in line. It seems like the government's having a great time. Now, I'm somebody that's a law-abiding citizen. I pay my taxes. I mind my business. I do the right thing. I try to do the right thing every single day. And the government still keeps persecuting the freedoms that I have. Now, ladies and gentlemen, let me get started with this, okay? About like 8 months ago, I probably talked about, the VPN bans are coming. Well, ladies and gentlemen, it seems like on May 6th, or May 8th actually, the VPN targeting, the laws actually going against VPNs are finally solidifying. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this law comes from our friends over at Utah. Now, this is the Online Age Verification Amendments. And this is a Senate Bill 73, okay, which obviously I want to read particularly for you guys because it has some rather interesting provisions. So I want to read some of these amendments really carefully coming out of Utah, for instance, right? So you can see that these are effective May 6, 2026, the retention of data, yada, 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 the exceptions. So over here you can see in section 3, an individual is considered to be accessing the website from the state, obviously Utah, if the individual is actually located in the state, regardless of whether the individual is using a virtual private network, proxy server, or other means to disguise or misrepresent the individual's geographic location to make it appear that the individual is accessing a website from the location outside the state. Now, all this aside, this is actually fucking technically impossible to prove. This is how you know the people who write these laws are individuals that probably should be fucking sitting in an old folks home, just gracefully riding out the rest of their years because they're so unwashed and unloved. Nobody in their family would love to fucking take care of them whatsoever. They're the ones that are writing these dog shit laws. Now, look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend to tell a politician what's better, but I'll tell you right now, this is an unenforceable law. It's a very stupid law, and if the Supreme Court worked in any fucking capacity, this shit would be struck down faster than anything you could ever see. But anyways, this is impossible to prove because, again, somebody from the state of Utah, so let's again read it carefully. So again, an individual, so somebody who's accessing a website, and again, we'll go into what types of websites in specific, from the state, so Utah, if the individual is actually located, regardless of whether the individual is using a VPN. So basically, even if you're outside the state of Utah, you could be sitting in, like, California state, for instance, and you might be like, you know what, I'd love to connect to this website from the state of Utah. So you route yourself through a VPN company, through a Utah server, and connect to a website. It is basically impossible for, again, these companies to necessarily prove who is connecting from where. I mean, these people don't understand the tech that they're targeting, right? It's just insanity. So, of course, obviously, the other thing that is kind of an issue towards free speech here in the First Amendment is a commercial entity that operates a website that contains a substantial portion of material harmful to minors may not facilitate or encourage the use of a virtual private network, proxy server, or other means to circumvent age verification requirements by providing instructions on how to use a VPN or proxy server, or means for individuals in the state to circumvent geofencing or blocking. Now, here's why this is also fucking brain dead, because here's the reality of it, right? What they're basically saying is any site that is containing substantial portions of material harmful to minors. Now, here's the problem with harmful to minors, right? If the politicians really, really cared about, stopping kids from looking at pornography on the internet, which I think everyone can agree with, these laws would say literally substantial portion of pornography, or just sites that host pornography, right? Places like Pornhub, places like any website that comes to your mind, you know what I mean? But instead they use the term substantial portion of material harmful to minors. Now, who defines what is harmful to minors? I mean, what does the government consider to be harmful, right? What kind of speech, what kind of education does the government consider? This kind of fluid, vague language only allows the government to basically throw anything into that umbrella so that if they want to censor speech, if they want to make things harder to access, they basically can say, that's just harmful to minors. Okay, let's add friction to your internet access, ladies and gentlemen. And by friction, it means, hey, now when you're accessing parts of the internet, you better be providing your identification around so we can prove, basically where you're going to on the internet. There's no aim for privacy anymore for you, okay? The little bit that you were allowed to have, that shit's gone. Now, I don't know how the First Amendment can actually, I don't know how they can do this. You can't teach people how to use a VPN. Like, what, are you going to limit their free speech and stop teaching people how to protect themselves and use VPNs to obtain a bit of privacy on the internet? VPNs by themselves aren't necessarily private. I myself don't really do advertisements for VPNs because I find that most of the companies that sort of shill VPNs out for YouTubers to sell to their audience are kind of, in a lot of ways, they have like different varieties of shadiness to them. In a lot of ways, it's really difficult to sort of look at a VPN and say, they're probably not logging you, they're probably not sharing your information with third parties. The only VPN that I would recommend is, as always, Mullvad VPN. They've been rated by the feds, they've come up clean, and ultimately they're the only VPN that you can use, from my knowledge, where when you make an account with them, the account setup procedure literally doesn't log an ounce of your information. You can pay with crypto. You can even put cash in an envelope and ship it over to their headquarters or whatever their processing center is. So ultimately, in the end, I think this kind of behavior is really fucking terrible to show. And again, I don't know if this could affect literally any website, because it could be any website that has a substantial portion of material harmful to minors. I mean, that literally could fucking include any adult website all the way to like Reddit, because they host NSA. That could even include a shit ton of Twitter, for crying out loud. Twitter alone probably has more spread starfishes than anybody could imagine, okay? So again, this level of vagueness is something to absolutely talk about. So anyways, ladies and gentlemen, it's not something that I think anybody really enjoys. And if you're one of the VPN companies, they consider this shit to be like a liability trap where it could punish all VPN users globally. And the reality of it is that it's going to get to a point where it seems like if you're a website hoster and Utah passes stuff like this where they could, enforce shit against you, you might have to consider blocking out Utah IP ranges so that, you just don't ever deal with the annoying nuisance that this state generates. But that's the problem with these fucking laws. There's no Supreme Court that's taken them down. The reality of it is that this is a bipartisan effort to fuck over your privacy. Whether you vote Republican, whether you vote Democrat, whether you vote right or left wing, it's funny to me that all of these politicians have suddenly come together in the span of a year, 2 years, 2 fucking years. Multiple countries have come together and they're like, you know what? We should enforce some checks on the internet for the kids. And when those checks don't work because everyone gets annoyed and they start going to VPNs, you have situations where, again, ministers from the UK are like, wait, hold on a minute. Wait, let's go after the VPNs next. And then, of course, in places like France, for instance, when you've got their ministers, they're oftentimes saying, listen, we're introducing a lot of these like social media bans, these social media checks, but since people are already bypassing them, I think the next situation forward is probably the VPNs. So it's like, if this legislation allows us to protect a very large majority of children, we'll continue, and VPNs are the next topic on my list. Again, I don't know how many times I have to say it, but the government doesn't give a shit about your kids, okay? Parents don't really give a shit about their kids. If you really do care about your children, consider using your own built-in parental controls. You don't have to get the government to watch over your little baby. You can do it yourself. You brought your kid into the world. You gave your kid a cell phone. Fucking monitor what your kid does online, okay? Prevent them from accessing this stuff at home. And before people are like, but Muda, being a parent is difficult. You can't monitor what your kids do 24/7, 365. I get it. It's difficult being a parent, okay? But that's a decision you made, okay? You decided to have a child. Now it's up to you to take care of the child. You know what I mean? It's like when I tell parents, it's like, they're like, I can't monitor what my kid is doing on the internet. Well, do you buy alcohol for your home? And they're like, yeah, I love buying me some booze. I have a nice little mini bar in my basement. Okay, well, uh, how do you prevent your kid from nicking some bottles and, like, chugging some stuff down? And they're like, well, I mean, it just blows their mind. It's like you tell somebody, it's like, well, do you own firearms, for instance? They're like, hell yeah, brother, I got me a few Glocks in my house. Well, do you keep them away from your kids? Do you keep them separate? Do you keep them, safely locked away? Hell yeah. Well, if you're gonna take all those precautions for things like firearms, booze, cigarettes, any form of drug paraphernalia, making sure your kids aren't sneaking out your vehicle, right? I mean, shit, cars nowadays have the ability for you to put fucking passcodes on them. So if there's all these things that you're trying to be protective of, why aren't you protective of when you give your kid access to a cell phone, to a tablet, to a computer, to anything that can access the internet? This big, scary internet with tons of crazy shit hanging around. Why are you not putting any effort into preventing your child from accessing things on the internet? I mean, the features are there, okay? You just choose to be a parent that gives no shits about this. So ultimately, of course, ladies and gentlemen, a government individual says that obviously for adults, in many cases, there's no plans to ban VPNs. And of course, this is kind of the standard language that gets thrown around, because you can't ban VPNs. Okay, you might introduce laws that annoy VPN companies trying to, like, restrict the technology. It's a lot similar to laws where governments target things like encryption. You can't get rid of basic functionality, basic security on the internet, because the government also uses them. The elites also use them. Unless, of course, these laws are specifically targeting individuals that aren't government officials, that aren't people of power, because those individuals get to live an elevated, privileged life that, excludes them, that protects them, versus the average person that literally is just trying to live day to day and trying to enjoy their life with as much privacy and as much safety as they can. The government is not meant to be this organization that basically, like, parents your life. This is not meant to be this organization that has such a control over your life. The government is literally there for, again, very specific things, in my opinion, right? I don't think the government should be allowed to dig deep into your life. I don't think the government should be allowed to violate your privacy on a day-to-day basis. I think all these things should be fucking pulled back, especially in the day and age we live now. I think all of this stuff should be pulled back by like 100 theoretical miles of abuse that has been happening over the last decade or two. So even when you look at companies like NordVPN, their response is always that, listen guys, it's technically unworkable. And the reason why they say it's technically unworkable is because all of these providers like NordVPN will just add new addresses. And again, there's no one-tier block list that exists. When you use a VPN service, it's designed to lock you behind a standard generic-looking, identifier that a lot of these companies, even if they know you're a VPN, they shouldn't be able to identify who you are behind that point. It's one of the reasons why your basic privacy and, in ways, your basic location and IPs are protected through the VPN. Now, obviously, they can figure out who you are through things like browser fingerprinting, but generally speaking, if you're so worried about your privacy, you'll combine a VPN with a privacy-focused browser, and you'll find your way. You'll find a way to either blend in with the crowd or find a way to strip out as much information as you exalt into the world. So ultimately, the thing about it here, it says that the VPNs also warn that attempting to comply could have serious consequences for lawful users worldwide. The bill doesn't appear to give the adult sites any option to just exit the Utah market and avoid those rules. Instead, the only option appears to be age verifying every visitor globally, regardless of their actual location. And again, this would subject millions of people to invasive identity checks that they have no legal obligation. Now, the reality of it is that, listen, this is a law written by, again, old fucks that have no idea about what they're doing, but they're in power. They're the ones that get to fucking decide this shit and ruin it for everyone else. You know what I mean? The other reality of this is that this is a law that's kind of there, in my opinion, to basically be a don't ask, don't tell situation where, instead of actually assisting children, it's a way for them to try and restrict the knowledge sharing of what a VPN necessarily is. It's kind of like when I teach you guys about self-hosting, about privacy, about internet safety stuff, a lot of these politicians actually don't like that, because anybody that teaches you how to actually, like, bypass these draconian systems that they've introduced with literally a few clicks is an actual threat to these individuals. And that's the kind of stuff that honestly is just breaking my fucking brain. Where does this kind of end? I feel like in the next few years, the ultimate reality, the ultimate like desire for this government or this world or the people that actually really run us is, to have systems where we are only allowed to install whatever these organizations want. It's one of the reasons why when it came to Android, I was really anal about saying, things like installing third-party applications on your phone shouldn't have any restriction whatsoever. You should be allowed to install whatever you want on a piece of hardware you buy. It could be any messaging application. It could be any application for any reason. Communication, encryption, safety, yada, yada, yada. When you purchase a computer, you should be allowed to install whatever application you want. If it was up to these politicians, they would literally have laws specifically designed where, installing operating systems like Linux would be so restricted because they wouldn't want you to be able to bypass the systems that they could force onto companies like Microsoft or Apple with age verification and all that nonsense. If it was up to them, they would probably force companies like Microsoft or Apple to say, listen, you should only be allowed to install third-party applications or functionalities through your own app stores, which we basically have full control over. Any form of freedom is literally just an illusion for the actual end user. When it comes to the internet, look, we have been blessed with 2 decades of accessing the internet and talking to anybody around the world with full freedom and in some cases near anonymity. And I think at this point, when it comes to a lot of these governments, they just don't fucking enjoy that whatsoever. There was another thing about, organizations or countries like Greece where it actually ends up being a lot worse. Where, if you were following this like a few days ago, literally in Greece, they were talking about getting rid of all forms of internet anonymity. So they're just ripping the mask straight off. And of course, when it comes to their leadership talking, they're like, the major problem behind anonymity is toxicity. Anyone, especially on social media, can smear an individual or carry out character assassination without facing any consequences. We must require a way to require platforms to verify the identity of accounts. There are many technical ways to achieve this. What they're basically saying over here is that they want all of these sites to have some level of a log on who you actually are for every user, so that, if you need to expose somebody, if that person needs to be exposed, we can pull that information. And you might be like, isn't that a good thing to curb internet toxicity? Do you honestly think these people care about the internet toxicity or the misinformation? They don't give a fuck. What they care about is if somebody actually has something dissenting to say, that instead of them being anonymous and allowed to speak to a full group of people online, if somebody speaks out of turn, their identity is always provided. And through that identity, actual retribution and reprisals can be given. But that's going too far into the world of 1984. And I don't know how far that is because we're pretty much rimming the edge of that world as we speak. But yeah, honestly, the VPN ban laws, man, just insane shit day after day. But I feel like it's important to talk about because, again, you probably had no idea this law existed. You probably had no idea that people in Utah passed it. And here's the reality. It's Utah, right? As much as I love my fans and like friends and, people out there in Utah, this isn't like a state similar to California or New York or Texas where, it has a much more impact in the national like circuit. But if states like those start to pass it, if states like Utah pass this kind of stuff and it makes sense and it works and people don't fight back, nothing stops a state like California and New York to start pushing this. And once those states starts pushing this kind of crap, it's all over. Remember, it doesn't matter who you vote for. And now it seems like every politician is kind of backing this crap up because they're talking about protecting children. It's never about protecting the fucking children. They implemented the internet with age verification shit that people were obviously tired of. They started to go for VPNs, and now they want to actually quell down a whole bunch of VPN nonsense. They're not outright banning it 100% draconian yet, because you can't do that, but you first have to start demonizing the technology. You have to start eliminating it from normal life, and then you actually have to go around poisoning the well to the point where people, the general public, will go, yeah, fuck this technology, let's ban it. It's bad. It's evil. And who knows what the next step is. They're probably going to want to talk about banning shit like encryption, banning other technologies that provide you with basic privacy and safety. So if you want things to change, okay, talk to your motherfucking representative, okay? Write them a fucking email. Tell them if you want to keep your welfare job writing fucking bills and doing shit for me, then you better play along with what the public actually fucking wants. You know what I mean? Swear to God, these politicians, bro, they're like fucking... You're just like gimps, suited up gimps on welfare, dude. Like government-assisted welfare, literally ruining my fucking day in life by passing laws nobody wanted. And the worst part about it is, the reason why I say welfare is not to be derogatory, but it's just the fact that, you know, I file taxes every year. I actually pay these people to bend me over and fuck me in the ass. You know? That's what pisses me off, actually, more so than anything. Ladies and gentlemen, if you like what you saw, please like, comment, and subscribe. Just like if you dislike it, I am out.